This is New Patreon Series 73A, Part 1. We're going to discuss the saying of Yeshua, unless one comes into being from the heavens, he cannot see the vision of the kingdom of God, that we find in John 3:3. Now this is probably an authentic devar of Yeshua. The original Greek translation would have been Agenethe came into being, into existence, from the Hebrew Aramaic verb haya, meaning to come into being. This was Yeshua's term for rebirthing oneself into the divine image of the eternal Bar Enosh, the archetypal human being that had not fallen into sin. And the vision he takes of the Bar Enosh is, of course, from Daniel 7:13 and Enoch and many other places. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. That's a Bar Enosh, coming with the clouds of heaven. Now that can be translated one like a human being, but when we find the term the Bar Enosh, Ha Bar Enosh, it means a different thing than just a human being. It means the archetypal human being. It was not the same process as human birth or generation, and the Hebrew Aramaic word for emanation, not birth, was used to describe rebirth. In later transcription possessed by the Johannine churches, the Greek agenethe, coming into being, was transformed into genethe, as in the Johannine genethe anothen, born from above, which Yeshua is portrayed as saying to Nicodemus, you must be born from above. And that can be also translated generated from above. It was probably from this misunderstanding of divine birth as parallel to human birth that the pericope of Nicodemus was constructed. So in John 3:3, Jesus replies and he answered him, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. So this is the born again idea that you find in all of the fundamentalist churches and so on. So Jesus explained spiritual rebirth to the Pharisaic sage Nicodemus in the Gospel of John 3:3. It's not an authentic piece of history. Now, the Nicodemus story was fictional. It was created. It was written by the author or authors of the fourth gospel. There are two reasons why the Nicodemus story could not have been historical. First, the Hebrew Aramaic word for human birth was different from Yeshua's word for spiritual rebirth. There could have been no way for an Aramaic-speaking Nicodemus to confuse the two kinds of birth, as he does in the Johannine pericope, because they were very different words and meant very different things. And second, though Jewish sages had described the Ruach, or Spirit of God, as both fire and the breaths of life, breathed into Adam at his formation, nowhere did they describe spirit as wind, as in the Johannine Nicodemus pericope. So the saying attributed to Yeshua about the birth from above, An me tis genethe anothen, unless one is reborn from above, comparing spirit to wind, John 3:7 and 8, is an editorial fiction relying upon the Greek word pneuma, wind or spirit, not the Hebrew word ruach, divine spirit, as in fire. Examples of ruach as fire would be things like the Hebrew burning bush that Moses came upon, Elijah's chariot of fire, the tongue of fire on Pentecost, and so on, and many other examples. Here's some further background to the Nicodemus story. The pericope was developed through redaction of sermons originally given by the Apostle John and composed and redacted most likely in stages in Ephesus about AD 75, 110. Quote, among those born of women from Adam until John the Baptist, there is no one so superior to John the Baptist that his eyes should not be lowered in his presence. We find that in the Gospel of Thomas, first part of Philippians 46. So reverence was shown to Jewish saints by standing and looking downward without eye contact, which had been so in the Middle East for millennia. For example, Egyptian instructions of Ptah-hotep. If thou look at him that is before thee, thine host, pierce him not with many glances. It is an offense to the Ka. That would be the Hebrew nephesh, or personality, to stare at him. Yet I have said, as the Logian 46 goes on to say in the Gospel of Thomas, yet I have said, even though John the Baptist, there's no one so superior to him that his eyes should not be lowered in his presence. And yet I have said, whichever one of you comes into being as a newly born or Yeled, knows or experiences the Malkuth and becomes superior to John. Now, this statement was an indication that Yeshua acknowledged John as the greatest of the prophets, but considered his eschatological basor about the day of Yahweh to be inferior in comparison to the rebirth proclamation or basor of Yeshua. The Apostle John and Mary Magdalene fled to Asia Minor and established the Jewish Christian congregation at Ephesus, probably about AD 41, and this was probably to avoid arrest by Herod Agrippa, who executed his brother James. He was called James the Greater because he was the older one, but James the Lesser was the actual brother of Jesus, but James the Greater was the brother of John. So his brother, James, son of Zebedee, was beheaded by Herod Agrippa about AD 42. Some sources say AD 44, according to traditions known to Clement of Alexandria and Eusebius. Legend says his head is kept as a relic in the pilgrimage shrine at Santiago de Compostela, where people make many pilgrimages. And John remained in Asia Minor and did not return to Palestine. That is why in Acts 15 it does not include the Apostle John at the Council of Jerusalem, presided over by James, the brother of Yeshua, in AD 49 or 50, when Paul was given a ruling about circumcision and other things regarding Gentile converts in the churches he had founded. Now, we should say that Herod Agrippa had supported Claudius after the murder of Emperor Caligula and was rewarded in AD 41 with the title King of the Jews and total rule over all of Samaria and Judea. And that's AD 41. To appease his Jewish constituency, he executed James, the brother of John, and expelled the other itinerant apostles because they were offensive to the Jewish establishment. From this, it seems clear that James, the brother of Yeshua, was not an itinerant evangelist. By remaining in Jerusalem as leader of the persecuted Messianic community there, he was able to protect it by virtue of his reputation among the general population as a tzaddik or Jewish saint. So he was not a wandering or itinerant evangelist like James, the brother of John. And uh, it would have been a big mistake for the Romans to execute James, the brother of Jesus, because he was considered so great a prophet, although he was later martyred by others. Thus it seems that John and Miriam, or Mary Magdalene, and the widowed mother of Yeshua remained in Asia Minor after AD 41, where they developed an independent form of Jewish Christianity, quite different from what James, the brother of Yeshua, and Peter were overseeing in Judea, the Galilee, and west to Rome. So we have two different kinds of Christianity, basic kinds of Christianity, in the east and in the west. And by the 2nd century, Johannine Christianity had evolved into the proto-Gnostic, Greek-speaking Gentile form found in John's Gospel, which transmits the pericope about Nicodemus and the confusion between human and spiritual rebirth. So please click on the Patreon link in my description just below the video to become a patron, helping to sponsor my new videos on the pre-Christian teachings of Yeshua. Thank you. Please click on the Patreon link in my description just below the video to become a patron, helping to sponsor my new videos on the pre-Christian teachings of Yeshua.